Now I'm going to show you how to set up the database for using these examples and in general. If you're using WAMP server, it's going to make things a lot easier because everything's going to be installed for you. Otherwise, you have to download the PHP administrative screens here for PHP MyAdmin. It's open source, easy to install, and you can just use the README to get it going. Here we are in PHP MyAdmin from the local host, which is important. That's local to this machine. We couldn't access this from another IP address or something like that based on what we're going to set things to here. That's pretty secure. You don't want your root to be your root user account, the admin account, to be accessible from anybody that might stumble on your Apache server via the internet, because if you're on the internet, then that can actually be visible if you don't have your firewall preventing it. PHP MyAdmin is the nested folder structure, and this is the main admin page. We'll be setting some privileges. You'll notice here that the configuration warning is coming up down here at the bottom. The root admin account doesn't have a password, and that's not terribly secure, so you can read this, but it is basically telling us to change that root password. If we also take a peek at the connecting to the data example here, we see the warning is coming up that user 1 doesn't exist at localhost. Localhost is how this is set up. This is specifically only usable from the localhost machine, and the IP address doesn't matter here in this case because the localhost is how it's going to connect. User 1 is an account that we're going to create right now. So we'll get rid of this and that other configuration error before moving forward. So we click Privileges. You'll see a couple of accounts here. We're going to delete this any account here. We don't need that one. And the root account, we're going to set a password. Before we do that, because that's going to cause a couple of issues, we're going to add that user 1 by clicking the Add a New User button right here. We'll put in that user 1. We won't select any host. We'll select local host. If we select any host, you may notice that %, and that's what it means. Any host not specifically limited to the local host, so other IP addresses could access this account, if they have access to the server, that is. But we will select localhost. This is so we can prevent certain intrusions into our database. And we'll just select the basics here. We'll explain this in a little bit, but if you want to select data, actually view the data, grab it from the database, or insert, update, or delete data, rows, columns, different bits of information, then you need to select all 4. We need all 4 selectable here. You could set things up in a different way. That's for another time, of course. So we'll hit go, but first we'll set that password. Testing. Or whatever you want it to be, as long as you match everything moving forward. And we'll hit go. You can see the SQL is displayed here, and you can see it's going to be user 1 at localhost. So that is going to look exactly like the example that we have in our other browser window. We can click the home again and just see that we still have this error to deal with, this warning. We'll go back here, right click, refresh. There we are, connecting successfully. So 1 out of 2 things done. We'll go back here and go into privileges. And now we see that we have the root. We need to change the password. So when we do this, it's important to know that you're going to have to set up some configurations afterwards, because PHP MyAdmin knows that this is set up a particular way in the beginning, and it's going to not have access to the database after we change this. So you're going to get an access denied error here, but we will change that. Notice all the other privileges here for that root account. You can uncheck the ones that you know that you don't necessarily want for that root account, but the root account's going to really have access to everything, so I wouldn't touch that. Down at the bottom, we'll give it a password. Whatever that password's going to be, you're going to need that password later in a couple of minutes as we move forward in order to make the configuration for PHP MyAdmin work correctly. And then you can see we have other details here at the bottom, and we're going to hit the go button here. It makes that change. That's the actual SQL. Click home again. Just like I said, access is denied for root at localhost. Now we're going to move forward into the configuration file, and this is what you need to set up in order to get rid of this error. So this is a little bit of a showstopper at the moment, but not to worry. this is the only point that I would say if you are new to lots of these concepts and you're having problems, go into WAMP server and actually uninstall the whole thing. Just uninstall it off of the computer. You might want to save your Apache conf config folder. That's something you might want to do, but you can easily set that up again if you're just setting up a virtual host. I don't recommend doing that if you have other databases on your machine, of course. That's just if you're new, you're a beginner, and you're having problems, and this error has really caused you problems, you forgot the password or something. Moving forward, we'll get rid of this particular error. But this is the point where you could uninstall the WAMP server if you worked with the WAMP server, and that's going to uninstall everything off, and then you could reinstall it. Or you could just follow the instructions that I give you moving forward, and everything should run smoothly for you. If we look at the www directory, and I have it open here already, you can see that within your PHP 5 folder, it could be PHP or just PHP 5, this is not necessarily where you're going to find things. You might think that's where you're going to find your files. It's attached with your web server, but that's going to be located within www here. It may be a different folder for you, depending on how you install things. But within that, you're going to place your phpMyAdmin folder, and then you can run setup information for how this is going to work. We're going to set up the configuration file as well. I'll show you how to do that. And this is going to rely on looking in here, and you can see that there is a setup file that you can work with. And I might have already edited it, but at the same time, I think it's going to be somewhere else if we can just sort it. I thought it would be in order there. But what we can do is we can actually just open this up. It's a very simple file to work with, config inc.php. This is another standard way to name your include files, but I wouldn't recommend using inc. Just keep it at PHP. We'll drag it in here, and what we'll do is, first thing we're going to look for is password in quotes, and we'll do a search on the source code here. Search as you need to. You'll see that we have passwords that are blank here. This is on a default configuration. So now I'm going to show you what happens if you uninstall WAMP server and then you want to reinstall it again. You might still have databases there. Those databases are still going to be in place. They're not going to necessarily be removed. So you just have to do a couple of things here to make sure it's going to work for you. Now what I can do is I can go back in, hold this down. You have to actually hold it down or it pops up. We'll go into phpMyAdmin, and you might get this. You might get the access denied for root at localhost. Well, I set things up to a special password, and I called it test or testing, depends on what you want to set up. And then when you reinstall it, it actually is going to disappear. So we'll place in testing. And each time that we see a password pop up, there's a whole bunch of configurations that we have to take into consideration. But it's in multiple locations and you just have to use it and change it. This is a special SQL validator. You don't have to change that one. There's different ways to deal with that. You just go through and see if any of these array configurations need to be set from the empty string. Because when you first install the MySQL, it's going to have root admin level access to the database that doesn't necessarily use a password, so it's not necessarily what you want to do. So that should be fine. So the configuration file is read, and you can see that we're still working on it. Access denied for user again. We say, okay, well that's not the password. So we'll try the other password that we have there. And you just go through it again. I just want to show you that if you forget the password, you can just go through a couple of times and just reset it. There's easier ways to do that. So it's either test or testing. And all you have to do is go through and make sure that your password is changed, and you can loop through that, or you should be able, depending on your editor, to loop through that as many times as you need to. Save that out. And that was it. So it might not get there the first time, so you don't panic. There are ways to get out of that as well, to reset the MySQL databases. You should really keep up on it and get a little bit more into the administrative work for MySQL. It'll help you out. Okay, so privileges is the first thing we want to actually take a look at. Now, you're going to see a bunch of things in there. There are different level access ways of getting in here to your databases. Now, you definitely don't necessarily want something to have a no password here. So you're going to have to research the different users that you have here within your your database to definitely take out some users that aren't necessarily needed. You may have your root passwords set to no password and not set at all. So what you do is you can actually select something, and then you can actually make a change to it. You can delete users that you don't want here as well. Delete the users and then reload the privileges afterwards. But you can also edit things. You don't have to select something to edit. That's only if you want to use this information down here. Now, we'll edit the root because these do have passwords. I did set them. You want to change both of them. There's different meanings for this, but it gets a little bit complicated to explain in a short period of time. The